BlackRock Frontiers Investment Trust invests in the less developed markets in the world. So that universe is defined as the emerging markets and the frontier markets, but excluding the 8 largest markets by market capitalization. So excluding China, India, and a number of the other larger markets. This means that it offers exposure to countries and to companies that typically an investor will have very, very little exposure to. If you have a mainstream emerging markets fund, you will likely have a significant position in China, in India, in Korea, and a few others. But there are lots of interesting, exciting, smaller countries that are growing faster, which you may have, that your fund manager may simply buy a single stock or no stock at all. So it offers something very different in pursuit of long-term growth. There are 3 fund managers on the team, and they use all the resources BlackRock has to try to generate growth. There's a large macroeconomic or top-down component, so they'll look to try and understand where all of their countries are in the business cycle. They often have very unique drivers and factors to consider. And then they will also look at companies from the bottom up on a stock-specific basis, trying to find companies with attractive earnings potential on reasonable valuations. There are a number of attractive features of BlackRock Frontiers investment universe. The first is the high GDP growth that's common across the universe. This universe contains some of the fastest growing economies in the world, and often these economies are growing thanks to what you could call endogenous factors, so factors that are much less dependent on global trade or the global economy, but based more on their own internal development, their young populations, urbanization, and other such trends. Because these countries are often growing under their own steam, they can be much less correlated than you would think, not only to each other, but to global economic conditions and global stock markets. So they can be surprisingly resilient as a whole. An additional feature is that because lots of investors overlook this region, the companies can be quite under-researched. So there is the potential for a well-resourced active management team to add significant value. Now, at BlackRock, the managers have extensive resources behind them to throw at every aspect of stock selection and idea generation. They'll travel extensively in their region, speaking to key stakeholders, to potential investment, and they have a lot of levers to pull to try to generate growth from this region. And finally, it's worth considering the dividend. Although the managers don't explicitly target a dividend, and there is no commitment by the board to pay a certain level or to grow the dividend, in practice, the fund has typically had a very attractive yield, simply because of the earnings and the dividends on the underlying companies. BlackRock Frontiers has performed very well over the medium term. So if we look at a 5-year period to the end of July 2024, the NAV total return is around 45%, and the MSCI Emerging Markets Index is around 20 percentage points lower than that. The Trust's own benchmark, which is a bespoke benchmark focused on only those countries that they invest in, is up only 3% in total return terms over that time. So clearly the managers have done a really good job of generating strong returns from stock selection and generating alpha against both of those indices. One helpful factor has been not being invested in China, which is really struggling at the moment from an economic and stock market perspective. And it's worth noting that investors who are worried about having exposure to China may simply not buy an emerging markets fund because it's typically very heavily invested there. But BlackRock Frontiers offers a way to invest in emerging markets, developing countries, without taking direct China exposure. If we look over the shorter term, so 2024 year to date, returns have been positive, but a bit more sluggish, and the trust is behind the MSCI Emerging Markets Index. I think a key factor has been underperformance of two largest country exposures, Saudi Arabia and Indonesia. They've delivered positive returns, but just disappointing positive returns. In the case of Saudi Arabia in particular, last year was a great year, and it's just been a bit more sluggish this year. One reason will be that even though BlackRock Frontiers is much less correlated to the global economy and global stock markets, its universe can't escape the impact completely of a slowing Chinese economy, high US interest rates, and worries about a US recession. So that may have weighed on commodity prices, energy prices, and some of their markets. It's always worth stressing that past performance does not give a reliable basis to estimate future performance. And there are lots of risks in BlackRock Frontiers universe, economic risks, political risks that have to be borne in mind. Nonetheless, we think that BlackRock Frontiers, the investment managers, have shown that they can generate really attractive absolute and relative returns from highly differentiated proposition, highly differentiated market, with low correlation to the typical investor's core building blocks of their portfolio. And so we think the trust has a lot to offer growth investors and maybe income investors too.
Past performance is not a reliable indicator of future results. The value of investments can fall as well as rise, and you may get back less than you invested when you decide to sell your investments. It is strongly recommended that if you are a private investor, independent financial advice should be taken before making any investment or financial decision. Please be aware that there can be a time lag when we release podcasts, meaning time-sensitive information may no longer be accurate at the time of publication. Kepler Partners LLP has a relationship with some of the companies covered in this podcast, which may impair its objectivity. Kepler Partners LLP is authorized and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority.